Alright, so I don't know if you guys ever done this before, but I figured I'd make a quick video since I was already doing it. Share with you guys how to do some soldering techniques, how to make sure your wiring and stuff is clean. So I've got these resistors here. These kind of like high power resistors. So they generate a fair bit of heat, and I'm basically redoing how they're wired up because I had a harness rubbing on them and they got hot and melted. So I'm redoing them. I'm gonna get them up out of the way in a nice spot. So I've got this solder here that's still on the old wires. I need to get rid of them. So I'm going to show you what you need to do. Basically, I've got some desoldering braid, and I also have a little pump. You got to have a soldering iron, and basically, just get it hot. Sit there and let it sit on that till it gets hot. And then the wire should just, yeah, you see how it just fell off? Now you see this is already pretty well tinted with some soldering. So I don't need to really manage that too bad. So I'm just kind of cleaning them up, just to heat them up just a little bit, and you know, kind of pulling them off. I've got a wet sponge here. I just took like an SOS pad from the kitchen, cut it up, and then put some water on it. That's all it takes. You know, it doesn't take much. Soldering iron, I think I bought this at Radio Shack probably, man, 10 years ago. You know, you get it at AutoZone, probably at Walmart, cheap one, you know, it'll last you a while. If you're doing small components like PCBs, then something like this probably isn't what you want because you can't really regulate the temperature of your gun. So like for for wire on your car, for most things, you know, like that you have, this cheap one will work. But like if you're doing delicate things like PCBs, then you'll definitely want something that has a little bit more control on temperature. With PCBs, you don't want to get your boards too hot, whereas, you know, you have to get it hot to get it to hold. You know, there's such thing as a cold solder joint, and that's bad. When you use cold solder joints, it basically, they break off. You know, that they can fall apart easily, and you might get continuity at first, but then it'll break and fail easily. So you definitely don't want cold solder joints. Those are bad things to have. All right, so we got our pieces clean, my resistors clean. I didn't even have to get the desoldering braid or the vacuum out because honestly, it had plenty of solder already tinted to it. I'm not going to mess with that. So these look pretty good. So I put that to the side. Now we've got to do some wire. I'm going to put white and blue on one of these and orange and white on another. And then these are basically going to go to my LED, my LED turn signals. So that way I can get rid of the hyper flash. So, so basically, you know, you're going to have to strip this wire. I got twisted pair, and, you know, you got to untwist it a fair bit to be able to, you know, reach it like this. And kind of, actually, probably what I'll end up doing is mounting it to where, yeah, I'll probably mount like this so it'll be even, and then this will come down, is what I'm thinking. So, well, we'll just do it like that. I only need to strip a little bit, but before I even strip this wire, we gotta get heat shrink. So, and because you want to get your heat shrink on it. So I just find a small piece that easily goes over the insulation of the wire, you know, and it's called heat shrink, meaning when you get it hot, it shrinks, right? Now I don't need a 2-inch piece or 2.5-inch piece for each one of these. Honestly, I really only need something maybe about 1 inch long. So I can cut this little piece in half and do it for both of those. I could probably cut it in thirds if I'm really trying to scrutinize it, but I'm just gonna do half. So just make it easy. I got plenty of heat shrink. This heat shrink you can get at Harbor Freight. You know, you can get off Amazon, whatever you want, man. It's, you know, but it's just an assortment to get. So there's one. I'm gonna go ahead and grab the next piece for the white side, and it looks like the same size, not slightly smaller. And that's it right there. So now let's cut this one in half. That way, you know, just do it in a process. There we go. Now, I gotta strip this wire back, and really I only need to strip it back about the distance of this, right? So I really only need about 1/4 inch stripped. So I got my wire strippers, and then this is, it looks like 18 gauge wire. So I'm gonna find the 18 gauge here and just kind of squeeze it, pull it, there we go. And I'll do the same here. If you choose too small of a gauge on this to your wire, you'll end up cutting some of your wire out, and that's not good. There's actually a calculation that you can do to figure out what size of gauge wire you need, and it's based on how long of a wire you have and how much voltage and current or power that you're running through the line. So it's really important with audio systems when you're powering your amp. You know, if you got like a 1,000-watt amplifier, you need to make sure you have, you know, the gauge of wire that's big enough so it doesn't catch on fire, you know. Same way with hydraulics and all that. You gotta measure, you gotta know what kind of current that you're messing with to know how thick of a gauge of wire you need. Okay, so now before I can solder this, to make it easier to solder these things, what I need to do is tint my wires. Now I got a little pan vise. This makes it a little bit easier to do. So to tint the wires. So this is a little pan vise. So just pinch the wires and hold it in place for me. You know, nothing special. But before I do that, actually, I need to drop it in some flux. Just dip it in flux. You can get this with all your soldering stuff. You can get this stuff at Lowe's. In fact, that stuff was from Lowe's to sweat copper pipes. So nothing special about doing this. Basically, just get it out of the way. Get your soldering iron out. Get your solder. You know, you only need a little bit. Basically, what's going to happen is you put it on the wire and get your wire nice and hot, and then it'll take the tint. That's all it takes, you know, just a little bit. But it only takes it when it's hot. If that wire's not hot, you know, it's not going to suck in. So now that those are tinted, I got to tint the other side. In fact, I can just do this way. There we go. All right, now, if I've got these tinted well enough on both ends, then I shouldn't need to add solder when I solder the two pieces together. So, I shouldn't need flux either. So now, what I do need to do before I do that is I put on my heat shrink. So I slide that down, and then I'll slide this one down. Now, I can just put the heat down on, I'm going to put it on the resistor because it's bigger, and you know, make sure it absorbs the heat, and you know, just try and hold the two together. And once it gets hot enough, and it'll take, and then you just give a little tug test. That's a good solder joint right there. That one looks pretty decent. You would think I've done this before. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. Get this thing to hold still. Put some weight on that. There we go. Let's getting hot. Now, my wire's getting too hot for me to hold it without it sticking. So I'm just going to get my needle nose pliers out here. And you don't get it too hot because then it'll melt your insulation on the wire too. So the important thing is you need to get it stuck in place and then let go with the heater or the iron, the soldering iron, and hold your wire in place and it'll stay. There we go. There, that one looks pretty good. Now, I can slide my heat shrink down on it. And usually you gotta let it cool off a little bit before you do this, because if you do it too soon, your heat shrink will melt before, you know, you have, before you get it in place. So, alright, so now I got my heat shrink in place, hit it with my heat gun, and just melt that stuff down. There we go. There's one down. I just gotta do this other one. Remember, put your heat shrink on. Alright, that's another one. So, it's not too hard to do. It's all about figuring out and just, you know, being patient, keeping it clean, you know, put quality into it. Whew, that thing got hot on me. There we go. I'm gonna just slide the heat shrink on it. Okay. There you go. Now you would do the same thing if you were doing wire. You know, wire to wire, you tint the two, heat them together, hold them, and then slide your heat shrink over it, heat it up, you got a good solder joint. Let me know if you got questions.